Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Radcast. I'm here with Elizabeth, and today we're doing kind of a new form of this medium. We're experimenting with the medium, and I'll talk about more about that in a minute. But first, wanted to welcome you, Elizabeth, to the program. Great to see you again, as always. How are you doing there, Elizabeth?
I'm great. I'm glad we're opening this one up, and I hope we'll be joined. That would be really exciting to have some input from some other people. However, I love talking to you, so proceed.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and very much likewise. Yeah, so this is the first time. We just had this idea literally a few minutes ago of saying, hey, why don't we just make this one open to the public, broadcast to the public in real time, and anyone can join. And I just threw it up on my Facebook page. I don't know who will see it, and then we'll do another one of these this coming Tuesday, June 6th, and that we will schedule in advance, and we can actually put it up as an event on Facebook, and that way people have an opportunity to actually put it in their calendar, as opposed to this one just boom, hey, we're doing this live right now, anyone want to join? So, but that's kind of the nature of both experimentation and, frankly, revolutions. I'm actually, just to talk about the medium itself and this experiment, I'm kind of reminded of Muhammad Yunus, the founder of Grameen Bank and really the pioneer of micro lending. He was a professor of economics at the main university there in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, and he was so frustrated to see his just suffering under such oppressive poverty. And here he is, an economist studying economic models, econometrics, and all this, but he felt none of that was really making a difference. And so, I don't know, do you know the story, Elizabeth? You can just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you do or don't know the story. Okay, looks like you do. Yeah?
No, what? Tell me.
Okay. And in fact, even if you did know the story, for our audience, let me tell the story briefly. But he was so frustrated that he walked out of his office and just down onto the street and just went up to some poor people and said, what do you need? What would really make a difference? And they just said, we just need a little money to get started, and then I'll be able to, buy a wheelbarrow and do some work, or buy a bicycle and do some work, or buy some chickens and make some eggs, but I just need working capital. And so Muhammad Yunus then just reached into his wallet, gave the person, I don't know, the equivalent of, $10 or $20 or something, and then just said, look, just pay me back when you can, but I'd really like to help you get a start. And that became phenomenally very, very successful. For a number of reasons that are specific to Bangladesh, it turned out that Bangladesh was a great place to start this model. It hasn't been so successful in other places. But I kind of feel like in us just publicly broadcasting this and inviting anyone to join, it's largely, frankly, out of frustration that what's taking us so long to get together. And, yeah.
We have to do something. That's the thing. And that's a story that you just told. I mean, what can be done? And we can sit and think and plan and worry and model and so on and so forth until we're all gone. This is jumping in and saying, let's do something. Anybody want to join us? Anybody else have something to say? Any other ideas? Any other motivation? Any other resources to bring to bear? Let's see what happens. So yes, I think it's great.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And with howtochangetheworld.org, where we're opening it up so that not just Jamin and Elizabeth can start a conversation and invite the world to join, but literally anyone will be able to start a conversation on any topic that's related to changing the world. By the way, not limited to climate change, any topic, because of course, all these problems are interrelated, interconnected. It's like a matrix or a spider web of intersecting and self-reinforcing problems. So anyway, so enough on the medium and this experiment. Let's start to talk some substance. And I was going to start, but go ahead, Elizabeth.
No. What were you going to say?
Oh, sure. So I just want to remind you to please mute the mic because I'm hearing a lot of the static back and forth. It becomes just a habit of muting and unmuting over time. So starting off, I'd like to start off with a topic I'm super passionate about is how do we prevent this, this climate crisis? How do we prevent it from being this horrific consequence of all of our industrial activity over the past several hundred years? How do we prevent this total collapse of not just civilization but life on Earth as we know it, with abrupt climate change? And I often talk about the meta solution and the solution, or the solutions plural rather. So the meta solution is that which generates the solutions. So I give the example of, let's say that instead of looking for solutions, we're looking for golden eggs, right? Well, we can go out looking for golden eggs, or we can get a goose that lays golden eggs. That goose that lays golden eggs is a meta golden egg. It's that which generates golden eggs. So a meta solution, like the goose, is that which generates solutions. So what is this meta solution? What is this magical thing that's going to generate all these solutions? Well, what I've been promoting is this idea that we can intentionally co-create a massively higher form of intelligence than any intelligence that we've witnessed to date on planet Earth, whether individual intelligence or group intelligence, such as, for example, NASA, Wikipedia, etc. But a massively powerful form of intelligence, orders of magnitude higher form of intelligence than any of those that I've described or that anyone else has witnessed on Earth. Because that massively higher form of intelligence will be, my hypothesis is, that once configured, once set up, once created and organized, this massively higher form of intelligence, which is a mashup of human intelligence, of massive numbers of participants, millions of participants, and artificial intelligence, which has been growing by leaps and bounds for the past several decades, and if anything, accelerating over the past few years. That mashup, that combination, is what I call radical collective intelligence. That radical collective intelligence is the meta solution because it will be so darned smart that it will simply be able to come up with solutions that would blow the minds of a mere mortal such as myself, with just how elegant, how powerful, how efficient these solutions are at solving our problems. So I know that all may sound a bit abstract. If you want to learn more about what we're doing in that area, please visit radish.org, which is where kind of our home base, where we're pioneering radical collective intelligence. But then as we develop this meta solution, this goose that lays the golden eggs of solutions, what are the kinds of solutions that we might envision? Well, one of them is some form of geoshading to cool the planet, because the big threat right now is abrupt warming on the order of several degrees, which in turn would kick off even further vicious feedback loops, causing even more warming and more destruction. And where the dust would finally settle, we'd be at somewhere on the order of 9 degrees centigrade hotter than the pre-industrial revolution baseline. Whereas scientists have warned us that 2 degrees hotter is the absolute threshold that we don't want to cross, because you get to 2 degrees hotter and all kinds of runaway effects kick in. Well, the runaway effects are kicking in right now. We're approaching 2 degrees hotter right now. And so 9 degrees hotter is it is essentially unthinkable in terms of having a planet that could support life, human life or other kinds of life.
It's catastrophic.
So, pardon me?
It's catastrophic.
Utterly catastrophic. Absolutely. And so when I say geoshading, I first want to get clear what I don't mean. What I don't mean is spraying a bunch of particles of, sulfate, this or that or whatever up into the atmosphere, because that's the most frequently cited form of geoshading. What I do mean is deploying in space massive sheets, massive surface areas of thin film reflective material to reflect away a small portion of the sunlight that's hitting planet Earth. But it turns out that even if we reflect away 1% of the sunlight hitting planet Earth, that would have a substantial cooling effect. And so geoshading, and the way I see geoshading, it's kind of like, when an ambulance first arrives at an accident scene, if somebody's not breathing, the first thing you do is CPR. Now, is CPR going to solve all the patient's problems? Is it going to heal the ribs that were cracked or the spleen that's ruptured or what? No. All it does is give the patient a chance to live a bit longer. And while they're living a bit longer, then, the hospital, the surgeons, whoever can, work on the other things that need to be fixed. But we need basically a form of CPR for the planet, because with this rapid heating that's happening right now, with the catastrophic consequences that we just mentioned, we're basically out of time, and we're just essentially confining ourselves to a form of hospice, a form of planetary hospice, like you mentioned this past Tuesday, Elizabeth. And doing some sort of planetary cooling, some form of geoshading, is like that. It's like CPR. It just buys us some time. Now, in the process of buying us some time, it would also have unintended consequences. And it's not that I'm okay with those unintended consequences. It's just that if we don't do some form of emergency cooling of the planet, then we are virtually guaranteed an Armageddon-like outcome in the next few years. So we're really, really out of time here. And now, of course, geoshading is a very, very tricky problem. There's a lot of ways of doing it, not just the thin film reflective way that I talked about. And of course, there's dozens of ways of doing even that. But we would benefit tremendously from a massively higher form of intelligence that we've been postulating to figure out the right way to do it, the best ways to do it, B, sell that to the public, so that the public gets really excited about it, and C, sell it so effectively to the public, get them so excited that they in turn put pressure on their governments to disperse the funds, reorient NASA and similar agencies to get right on it and deal with this as the planetary emergency that it actually is. Like we see about in the sci-fi movies from time to time. Oh, the world coming together and the leaders coming together and everyone kind of forgetting about whatever the conflicts that used to occupy their attention while we deal with this existential crisis. So anyway, in a nutshell, that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of both the meta solution of radical collective intelligence and the actual solutions that can actually buy us some time, and then we can use that time to implement yet other solutions. But if we don't have any time to implement anything, then it's all a moot point. And that's why I gravitate initially towards some form of geoshading or planetary cooling. Back to you, Elizabeth, and thank you for your patience.
No, thank you for laying that out so succinctly. And I just want to add something that I think is very radical in certain circles anyway, which is that intelligence of which you speak, to which you refer, which would be a combination of human intelligence, collective human intelligence, and artificial intelligence. I want to throw in some divine intelligence, because that is something that we all carry within us. We are disconnected from it. We do not know how to access it. And we are kind of lost without it, frankly. Now, contacting that, accessing it, and being able to channel it is it's it's not hard, but we're not trained to do it. So I think that's an incredibly important piece, because that's part of why, probably most of why, we are where we are today, is that we have lost our contact with the divine intelligence that most of the other animals on this planet actually have not lost. They know how not to foul their nests, how not to kill themselves, how not to kill each other, except as needed. So, anyway, I just wanted to mention that. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about what happens if your wonderful plans for preventing catastrophe don't pan out. And, you know, we're starting to look at ways to hold back the tide here. Um, More and more people are recognizing that there is an overwhelmingly high tide that we're looking at. But I think the reality is that unless something really dramatic changes, we are looking at catastrophe. Miracles happen, and I'm really cool with that. I mean, who knows? Maybe. We can't say. Nobody knows. But given that we don't really see a clear and wide pathway, a well-established road to stopping, to a place where we are actually stable climate-wise and secure. I'm thinking about, what do we do when and if things start to become more chaotic for us? And obviously, there are places around the world where this is already happening, but it's going to start happening in more and more parts of our country and other countries that have been able to avoid it up until now, or have been able to skirt it in any case. And so I'm thinking, first of all, there is the advice that is coming from a number of people like Guy McPherson, like Carolyn Baker, like Andrew Harvey, and I've certainly written about it myself, which is, live with all your heart. Do what you love. Um, be be fully alive, because you know life is finite. It always has been finite, but we're more aware of it. We have received this diagnosis of likely terminality, and so jump in, have your life, do the things that you want to do, say goodbye to the people and the things you want to say goodbye to, finish your business, and don't wait, don't hoard, and don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today. That's one thing. Then there's grieving. There is letting go of the things that you are likely going to lose, and doing the emotional work around that, which is a huge challenge for most of us, and it's a lot of work. But it's another thing that we can do. So those approaches to this time are being talked about, and I think that's really important and really, really, really critical. But, Jamin, I also start to wonder, are there other things that we can do practically that will make a difference, that will allow us to move through a time of chaos and crisis um, with the highest ideals and choices intact? I think as human beings, we have the capacity to live with so much glory and dignity. And I am contemplating this situation where there are massive waves of refugees, there's deprivation of all sorts, where people are really suffering. And so there's logistical stuff that we can think about. And some people are thinking about it individually, or in terms of their family or small community. How much water do you have? How much food do you have? These things make sense, but we can look at the emotional, the physical, and even the spiritual challenges that will likely accompany what lies ahead for us. And we can look at those and make some preparations. And we can look at them individually, we can look at them in terms of small groups, or we can look in terms of larger groups. Whatever. I mean, we're opening it up. That's why we're talking, right? Because we want to say, does anybody have an interest in this? I just found myself, kind of wondering why I wasn't talking to anybody about this. So now I am.
Yeah, for me, it's something where, I kind of vacillate between really confronting it and saying, wow, what do I do in the face of, while I'm working hard to do my part. Hey, we've got a guest, Ian. Welcome. How's it going there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
I can. Cool. What are we talking about?
We're talking about prevention and preparedness of global climate crisis. So prevention, how do we prevent? And by the way, we're recording and broadcasting. I just want you to know that up front. And we're experimenting with this new medium. And I'm really glad that you joined us, Ian. Welcome. And Ian, let me introduce you to Elizabeth West. Elizabeth, Ian.
Hi.
And part of this experiment, Ian, and we're going to be doing this on kind of an ongoing basis, is where it's like there's such a dearth, such a lack, a missing of this conversation in the world, given the extent of the climate crisis that's building and growing and threatening us with literally near-term human extinction. That's how severe it is. Why on earth are people not talking about this, and how do we get people to come together? So this is an experimental medium to achieve precisely that. And we're kind of in the midst of the conversation, which we're happy to recap to a degree and kind of get you on board. But before we do even that, any questions or comments, Ian?
Nope.
All right, awesome. So we were just talking now about preparedness, preparing for global climate crisis, both from the standpoint of, having those conversations, basically saying those goodbyes to our loved ones, and having whatever conversations we've been putting off that are really important for us to have. Another is the grieving. And then another is what we were just talking about when you joined in, is what are some of the things that we can do to move through this time of crisis, to live with dignity. And Elizabeth was just talking about that. Elizabeth, you want to maybe pick up the thread there a little bit?
Sure. I was just pointing to the fact that we are looking at, some very, very challenging times physically, in terms of logistics as well as emotionally. And so we have an opportunity, we have a small window here to come together to make preparations, which we can do on our own, but we can do some things together if we so choose. And so we're inviting people to think together about what's important and collect ideas and perhaps weave them together, so that more of us have the opportunity to benefit from each other's thinking and feeling about what's going on.
Yeah, and we're just having an open conversation, so Ian, just jump in anytime, literally.
All right, I'm just listening right now. I wasn't sure what it was about, so you guys carry on and I'll listen.
Totally fair, Ian. Really glad you're here. So, for example, in terms of preparation, what I've been doing lately is making plans to basically move myself and close family members to Orcas Island, one of the islands in the San Juan Islands here in the state of Washington, and stockpile years worth of food in the form of burlap sacks of dried lentils and other grains, and just to be able to, just baseline preparation logistics for how to survive. Because when civilization collapses, we will find ourselves in, I mean, one of the first things that's just going to break down are these very complex, intricate food production and distribution systems that keep us all fed. When civilization collapses, we're simply not going to have that, because with abrupt climate change, one of the first things to go is our ability to produce food, to grow and store food at scale. And when that dramatically diminishes and you've got mass starvation, that's when I just can foresee, tens of millions of desperate people in every country doing desperate things. I can see gangs in East LA, arming up and going and just looting, stockpiles of food. So at an individual,
fairly short term. We're talking in the short term here.
Well, the short term is in the next, on the time frame of the next, 5 to 10 years, and I'm basing off of the projections of Professor Guy McPherson, who has done one of the only comprehensive, holistic sort of syntheses of all the climate data, the methane, the carbon, the polar ice caps, the melting, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out the United Nations projections are just way beyond conservative. They're highly politicized, and they don't even take into consideration methane, which may have the single biggest bump of all. We're looking at potentially a 9-degree temperature rise over pre-industrial revolution global average temperature in the next decade, or potentially substantially less than that. So the preparation that we're talking about is in precisely that time frame.
And I want to jump in for a second, Jamin, and just say, you used the word survival, and for some people that's a really important idea. For me, it's not that important. I'm not sure that it's desirable or it's possible for us. Maybe, but it may not be. But what I'm thinking about is choice and dignity. So, if you have some food on Orcas Island, then you have a little bit of flexibility in terms of when and how you decide to exit. And if you don't have any food, and you don't have any water, and you don't have any shelter, then you have much less choice, you have much less control, and ultimately you may not be able to control your destiny to the extent that might be possible.
Yeah, exactly. And it's precisely that thought that here I am, a relatively privileged member of society, that I can actually plan and do some of these things to prepare. What about the people who don't have any cash reserves or ability to go to an island or whatever? What about them? And that's what actually, quite frankly, just to be brutally honest, I'm actually to a degree disgusted with myself that I've been spending time and energy just looking after my own interests and my own family's interests, when I really identify myself as someone who I'm here on this planet to look out for everyone, right? Not that I'm doing the greatest job of that, but that's really why I'm here. And so lately, my thinking has been much more along the lines of what can we do at a planetary level to prepare. Mm-hmm. And one of those things would be, for example, stockpiling grain and other storable foods at a massive scale, at a planetary scale. I just want to ask folks if it's convenient to mute your microphones when you're not talking, so we don't get the feedback. But and thank you. And what, so how do we do this at a planetary scale? Well, there is one big macro lever that we can throw at a planetary scale, and that is to phase in essentially the boycotting, the banning of grain-fed livestock, particularly beef and pork, where there's just a horrifically bad conversion of 20 calories of grain input resulting in 1 calorie of meat produced in the case of beef, or maybe it's even worse than that. And so if we were to phase out grain-fed beef, just for example, that should free up, massive quantities of grain that would have gone through this incinerator of grain-fed beef, but instead we can store, and as part of our preparation, to also to buy us time. And several minutes ago we were talking about prevention measures that could buy us time for the planet, because I guess what I'm really having a hard time coming to terms with is collapse of civilization leading to mass starvation and Mad Max, where everything, it just gets destroyed, and then we've got vanishingly little capacity as humanity to deal in a Mad Max world, as opposed to a world that, as I look out my window, is basically functioning, right now. And so I'm just kind of sharing some of my thoughts as to where I'm going with this. So on the, as an engineer, my tendency is, how do we prepare and design what we need to design and build so that we can last? But what I'm hearing from you, Elizabeth, is another perspective. Hey, what if we actually do not achieve that level of preparation in the time that we have? And we're literally looking at massive, the majority of humanity starving, but potentially dying a violent death. How do we, go out with dignity? How do we prepare to, for that scenario, right? As unpalpable as it is to think about preparing for that horrific scenario. Anyway, I'll let you share more on that, Elizabeth.
Well, I think the analogy is actually the individual human death, and it's a pretty good one. We all need to exit at some point, and some of us get more warning than others, which allows us to to decide how we want to deal with that reality. And people choose a lot of different paths, but most people want to finish some business. Most people want to make peace in some way or another. Some people want to fight like hell. But if we have some warning, then we get to make some decisions about how we want to finish our lifetime. And I think we are collectively in that position right now. And so we know it. We're not having to spend our time, sitting in a chemotherapy chair or having surgery or, lying in an intensive care unit, most of us. So we have an opportunity to think about how we want to finish not only our own personal lives, but our lives as part of a species that is possessed of several extremes. We have such incredible brilliance and the ability to live from mind and heart, which is quite extraordinary. And we also live from ego and greed and fear. So, it's a moment in time, and we get to think about how we want to proceed. And I'm just excited that we can have this conversation and that we can open it up and that we can invite other people to think about how we individually and collectively want to go forward. Whether it is fighting like hell, as you are doing, administering that CPR, trying to keep the patient alive, or if it is gracefully making peace and finding the ways to end this particular experiment with grace and
This particular experiment with what? With rice?
Grace.
Oh, great. What experiment?
The human experiment.
Yeah, and let me just set a little context for Ian. I've communicated with Ian on other topics. This is the first time we've communicated on this topic, and I can tell from your initial comments you didn't necessarily know what you were jumping into. But our context, where we're coming from, Elizabeth and I recently hosted Professor Guy McPherson for a week in California and then for a week up here in the Northwest. And we did a series of talks and events together. He is the world's leading voice on the topic of abrupt climate change, which is the phase of climate change that we're in right now. And as hard as this is to assimilate and digest, and it was certainly hard for me, I can't imagine it would be anything other than hard for others, including yourself, Ian, is this idea that we may only have a few years left. And I would say, short of some miracles, that I am actively in the process of trying to do my part to create these miracles. Short of miracles, the most likely outcome is rapid rise in temperature over the next few years, resulting in our inability to produce food at scale, resulting in mass starvation and other, desperate side effects of running out of food, such as what I simply call Mad Max, right, where people are just going around trying to loot and survive in a very cacophonous way. So one of the prevention and preparation schools of thought is how do we organize ourselves to.
I'm reading about him now. Is he saying that the climate's going to change so abruptly we're not going to be able to produce any more food?
That is correct, because our ability to support billions of people on the planet is predicated upon this relatively cool climate that the world has been in for the past, I don't know how many millions of years. But if you look back over the hundreds of millions of years, the vast majority of the time that the planet has been in a much hotter state, a much more stable, hot.
Why would it affect? I get how it would affect, places like Africa that can't sustain how many people they are without drought-resistant crops. But in North America, it could rise 10 degrees and we could still survive for a century growing different crops.
Is that based on a statistic or data point that you've heard, or you're just speculating? No, a 10 degrees centigrade rise.
Not going to die in 5 years. I mean, it's not going to be end of times in 5 years.
Wait, you're saying that we wouldn't see a 10 degrees rise?
If there's a massive rise, whatever he says, whatever it is, in 5 years, why would North America be devastated and everybody die? In other parts of the world that are traditionally don't have as many people, we don't have that many people in North America. Other places have way too many people. And they can't sustain that many people without GMO crops, which they have now. That's why populations have exploded. But wouldn't science be able to have different crops that we would grow here that would keep us alive for at least another 5 years?
I don't know the details, but the macro, I mean, again, this is where I rely on Professor McPherson, who's studied this over the course of decades. And he has said just very bluntly, the net of this entire macro analysis, including exploring questions like the one you just raised. Hey, what about North America? What about, what about this? What about that? Where he nets out is that he believes that the odds are extremely low that there will be any humans left on the planet 10 years from now. That's his prognosis. And, the reason I invited him to come to California and then to here the state of Washington was precisely so that we could engage, appropriate groups of people. Like in California, I invited him to speak at the Sierra Club. I wanted to let's get the Sierra Club together. All right, what do y'all think? And because there's a lot of scientists there, a lot of folks who've been exploring this for quite a long time, and we had like a 2.5 hour between the presentation and discussion we were there for actually close over 3 hours, really digging into the details of this. And because there are so many very valid questions, such as the ones that you're raising, Ian, we've actually started a weekly broadcast video conference series where we're going to be inviting in all kinds of other experts and really kicking the tires on Professor McPherson's hypothesis or theory, because we need to know what we're heading into so that we can prepare, so that we can prevent, so that we can do whatever we need to do. So we will be spending a lot of time really delving into the details of it. But the current prognosis that Professor McPherson offers is extremely bleak.
I'm reading about him right now.
Yeah, and I would recommend to you and to everyone, you know, that go to YouTube when you have time and just type in his name. You'll see a bunch. There's a lot of great stuff on there, including the one that we did at the Sierra Club in April. That'll be one of the top hits.
And his website is Nature Bats Last, one word. There's a lot of information there too. Jamin, we had agreed we'd go till 3:30, and it's 3:45. I actually need to be gone now.
Okay. But and Elizabeth, do you mind if I hang out with Ian if he's
I have something I have to do, but I'll be on the next one. I'm interested.
Okay, great. Awesome. All righty. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and adjourn. I want to thank you both for joining. Elizabeth and I kind of co-moderate, co-lead this particular series. The next one will be on Tuesday at a time TBD, and I'll post it again on Facebook. And so thank you both, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
All right. And thanks to everyone else who watches this recording. And join us next time. All right.
Great.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Take care.